As we face another election season, it's important to dispel a terrible neo-Marxist myth that's taken root on many college campuses and in the popular media. The myth is promoted by the same people who claim to be champions of diversity when they are in fact advocates of tribalism. Think of tribalism as a miniature form of extreme ethno-nationalism. True diversity can only exist when the heart and mind are free to choose and direct one's life. According to neo-Marxist devotees, immigrants from diverse places have come to these shores because American capitalists have recruited them against their will. The purpose of their recruitment was to exploit their labor and to maximize profits. The logic behind that extremely reductionistic view of the world was originally conceived by the German social philosopher Karl Marx in the mid-1800s, long before we learned about multiple intelligences, motivational factors, and personality types. In a truly free society, competent people like George Washington Carver, Henry Ford, and Bill Gates can exercise their innate talents to create new and innovative services, practices, and technologies that people want and need. As we consider that thought, we should remember that freedom is not free. Despite how many fingers point to those pesky Russians, there are arguably more threats to freedom and liberty from within our own country than there are from outside of it. There is no doubt that economics has played a major role in attracting millions of immigrants from around the world. They've settled in America's large cities and farmlands where they made life better for themselves and their children. I believe that the neo-Marxist view is not based on good evidence. There's a much better explanation for the rich diversity found in the American population. It's called chain migration. To create a migration chain, pioneering immigrants become established in a new land. If they are successful, the pioneers then communicate pleasant images of the host country to friends and family members back home. The chain is formed when others follow the pioneers into the new homeland. Most of the millions of legal immigrants arriving in America each year are not lured to the fruited plains by greedy corporations. Their own social networks provide a realistic explanation for their relocations. Neo-Marxist advocates, especially those who buy into a global citizenship model, encourage immigration to expand the left's political power base in the United States. Without fully appreciating American history, immigrants are a made-to-order population to exploit for political purposes. While some of the sentiments behind leftist policies are rooted in empathy and compassion, others are not. As suggested by behavioral scientist Jordan Peterson and the writer George Orwell, a number of liberal policies represent grievances against the wealthier classes because, they claim, rich people have historically taken from the poor. This makes little sense because the poor do not have any wealth from which to rob. Instead, some left-leaning pundits point out that it's the workers' labor that is stolen. Certainly, history is not devoid of instances in which workers toiled away at dangerous and tedious jobs for little pay. And sadly, many legal and illegal immigrants still work for meager wages. The next time you eat in an Asian restaurant, consider that some of the workers there relocated thousands of miles to serve you at meager wages. That is why democratic socialism is appealing to some Americans. While their arguments seem humane, the devil is in the details. Despite the best of intentions, all human beings are capable of being greedy, and the things that we sometimes covet extend beyond material items, including money. The ability to exercise power over others is seductive and corrupting. As President John Kennedy remarked at his inauguration in the winter of 1961, and I quote, "When power leads man toward arrogance, poetry reminds him of his limitations. When power narrows the area of man's concern, poetry reminds him of the richness and diversity of existence. When power corrupts, poetry cleanses." End of quote. The new president went on to explain that he invited, and I quote, Robert Frost to come and speak at the inauguration because he had something important to say to those of us who are occupied with the business of government. That he would remind us that we're dealing with life, of hopes and fears of millions of people. End of quote. While the late president's sentiments are poetic and contain some truth about the role that power can play, meant altering the attitudes of those who govern, it's doubtful that Genghis Khan, Pol Pot, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Robert Mugabe, and Jim Jones, for that matter, would have been swayed by the writings of Robert Frost or any other poet. Let's talk about an antidote to tyranny. The American founders were aware of poems and thought-provoking writings that could have soothed a tyrannical dictator, if it were possible. But they chose instead to set up a federal government in which the corrupting influence of power could be realistically managed. Like the Roman Republic, the founders adopted a doctrine known as separation of powers because they knew what life was like under a centralized authority. Also, like the Romans, the founders designed a government that French political thinker Charles Montesquieu would have described as a checks and balance system. In a checks and balance system, Congress was assigned the duty of creating legislation, the judicial branch was tasked with interpreting laws in light of the Constitution, and it was the executive branch's job to enforce these laws. It's astounding that the checks and balance system has worked so well over the past 230 plus years. The only time in which a separation of powers was in jeopardy occurred in the 1930s and early 1940s. That episode in U.S. history happened because Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected to an unprecedented 4 terms. FDR had plenty of time to firmly establish his appointees in federal courts and in agencies that he had created. He also famously tried to stack the Supreme Court. After his sudden death on April 12, 1945, there was a societal push to avoid another accumulation of power in the office of the president. In response, Congress passed the 22nd Amendment in 1947, and it was ratified by the states in 1951. The 22nd Amendment set presidential term limits at 2 4-year terms. Because natural law is the basis for true diversity, everyone, it seems, has an opinion about what American liberty means. The fact that diverse opinions exist in the hearts and minds of neo-Marxists, capitalists, conservative Christians, atheists, environmentalists, and pagans offers a glimpse into the essence of liberty's meaning. One has to look no further than to our own pioneering ancestors to understand the context of exercising free will. If we could read their diaries, their words would tell us that they were looking for God-given liberty that would make it possible to earn a living for themselves and their children. The descendants of those who are already here, Native Americans, as well as those who did not come here of their own free will, slaves, want the same things for their families. While the Christian-inspired ethos that lay behind the thinking of the founding of America was forged in Great Britain and Ireland, the concepts of liberty are available to anyone who thirsts for freedom and opportunity. As is evidenced by the tremendous diversity of the United States, the fountain of freedom has unlimited appeal. America is the land of opportunity. Well, I hope you'll join me next time when we explore significant American innovations that have benefited the entire world. See you next time on The Vantage Point.